Just want to let folks know that we are actually in the committee room, so please respect the rules of the room and decorum as well, or you'll be asked to leave if you are disrupting this meeting. Thank you. Off with public comment. If there's anybody wishing to fill out any items for that are already here that haven't yet filled out their cards for public comment, please do so now. The only ones I have for public comment are on multiple items, and that is Wayne Spindler and Eric Previn. If there are no others, then we'll go ahead and take those two on multiple items and close submission for comment on the other items. So Eric, come on up. Eric, you've got items on, you've got cards on 1, 3, 4, 6, and 7, and then general public comment.
Thank you. It's Eric Previn from CD2. The item number 1 caught my attention. I know that this was a jury verdict. There was a bad situation, guy in the front yard, drunk, and officers showed up, deployed the taser, and then the guy fought back in some way, because I think when the 50,000 volts are
hold your time for 1 moment. Please
okay.
put the...
give me an extra 30 seconds.
2 minutes on the clock?
You're very generous, sir. Let's move forward. Anyway,
that'll include your general public... Okay, there you go. Go ahead.
This is not my general public comment.
No, this is your 2 minutes.
So the point is that they deployed the taser, of which we got 4,400 thanks to your diligent efforts that we didn't necessarily want, and those... they had to shoot the guy because evidently he lashed out at an officer. So this is the family suing. It's a bummer, and it made me realize that tasers are a bad idea, you know, especially where we have such an enormous homeless population, to have all the officers armed with tasers when I think officers prefer not to use these tools. And here we are now appealing a verdict where a jury decided $2 million. Are we appealing? I mean, maybe the three of you decide to recommend that we not do that. I mean, or maybe there's some extenuating circumstance. It's a very sad story. And there's a lot of bicycle-related injuries that have been talked about. I know that the LA Times wrote a story about the 10-year, $20 million roughly of recent claims that we've settled. And here's another one where I guess it was Granados, that case, where out in the valley, and you know, he was hit by a school bus or something like that. So I don't know, you know, what we're doing about that. I know that there's been a lot of talk, but one thing that we should definitely be doing is not settling cases with friends of the council who were riding in an area where it was not really designated for a bicycle for record money. We sent $6.5 million to Mr. Godefroy, who, as far as I can tell, is running his company, seems to be doing fine, and he was right by his home. I mean, thank God he's okay, but we got a little hosed on that one, guys, where we were playing a dumb legal game. We got fleeced by a bunch of attorneys who've been donating to all of you, so it makes me feel bad on behalf of the folks. Now, Bon, unfortunately, is helping out by looking at down in the Marina and Playa area. We've got some sound-alike places.
Yeah, you're 1 minute for general public comment?
Sure. Just to finish that thought, we do appreciate, he's concerned that people are paying at a slightly higher sales tax rate in neighboring communities where they could be paying less at the City of Los Angeles. So he wants to make sure that those consumers are not overpaying and obviously paying to the LA city sales tax where that's possible. So in the general public comment, I would direct your attention to the article in The Intercept that came out on Sunday talking about blaming wildfires on the homeless population in part in Los Angeles. And I think that that story has just begun because, you know, there's really a lack of careful fact-checking on some of the allegations that were made that went sweeping around the country. So I would ask that we find the personnel in the fire department who are prepared to step forward and clarify the record so that the newspaper then can clarify the record and we can move forward with truthful and honest representations about how these fires start. The argument was made that a lot of it has to do with the ripeness because of the climate change.
All right, thank you very much. Please no applauding and disrupting this meeting. Mr. Spindler, you know all the rules. Yeah, we already called all those up that already filled them out. That's correct. So Mr. Spindler is our final speaker. Come on up. Yeah, we'd already started the meeting. Items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Stick to the items, please.
All right, number 5. See, when you do a good job, I say so. See, I'm not like one of these other people. You Jew bastard! That's not me. When you do a good job, I say so. Item 5 makes the business tax renewal deadline from February 28th to April 15th to coincide with the normal tax filings. This is a great thing. And this is really fucking up people in the business community because they have until February to figure out what their tax liabilities for April. And a lot of these businesses have to deal with deductions, they have to deal with itemizations, they have to deal with setbacks and returns and allowances. So this is an excellent thing. I fully support this. I'd like to know who the author of that motion was. I know it's probably going to be Koretz or it's probably going to be Blumenfield because the other two here, one's a drug addict and the other has big ears. So now we get to item 6, possible errors in calculations of the sales tax. The sales tax in this city is too damn high. And all those car dealerships in the Nuri Martinez 6th district, all the car dealerships in Mr. Bob's district know that the goddamn sales tax is too high. And what we need to do is for car purchases, we need to equate the sales tax with the lowest sales tax in the region, which would be Ventura County. So we should be charging the same sales tax for car purchases in LA City that you do in Oxnard, that you do in Ventura, and we'd be selling a lot more cars and getting a lot more sales tax revenue in the 3rd district and in the 6th district. So that's good. Oh, for the record, he just showed up. So now we got 3, 4 other motions dealing with lawsuits. And again, thank you to all the attorneys that sue the city. You're making this city better by telling these people to fuck off.
Thank you.
So now, we get to the public comment. I noticed we got some chairs that moved around here. And am I right? As Paul Krikorian fell suddenly ill, and he's going to be out for an extended period of time. That's the rumor. Tell me if I'm wrong. See, nobody want to tell me I'm wrong. So you see, I think Mitchell Englander going to be the new chair.
Under the purview of this committee, strictly to.
Is Mitchell Englander a member of this Budget and Finance Committee, city attorney? Oh, yes, he is, Mr. Spindler. Okay, so then that means I can talk about his big fucking ears being in the wrong seat.
You're not under item committee.
You can be under the jurisdiction. Criticizing elected officials is a fundamental First Amendment right, Mr. Big Ears.
The purview of this committee.
You're a police officer. You should know the California Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, allows you to criticize your elected officials within the body of a panel.
Please escort him out. Please escort him out. You're continuing to disrupt this meeting. Continue to show him out. You've got to stick to items under the purview of this committee. So, goodbye, Mr. Spindler. Goodbye, Mr. Spindler. Goodbye. You're continuing to disrupt this meeting. You're not being asked to talk. You're being asked to leave. You're continuing to shout. You're continuing to shout and disrupt this meeting. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much. Continue. Continue out. Thank you. All right. Is there anybody that hasn't been to this meeting before? Or any meetings? Okay. Welcome to your Los Angeles City Council Budget Finance Committee meeting. All right. So, let the record show as well that that we were joined also by Paul Koretz. So we've got Mike Bond and Paul Koretz and Bob Blumenfield here, and so we're all present. We do have one more card that did come in, but I'll go ahead and take it. He's here, Bill Watkins on item 3. So you got it.
Which one's live, Paul?
I'm sorry? Yeah, just anywhere you want to sit.
Thanks so much.
You got it, Bill.
Good afternoon. Sorry I was late, and Hi, everyone. So I'm sending emails. I'm actively volunteer pedestrian cleaning, and budget-wise, I hope it finds its way to the budget.
You filled out a card for item 3.
For 2, can I put 2 and 3 together? Actually, I filled out for 2 and 3. Did you see it for 2 also?
For two and 3.
Okay, can I combine 2 and 3
Go
for
ahead.
pedestrian cleaning and pedestrian reporting? I've given your legislative assistant my proposal in paper form. I have no comment on the case. It's not a case I know the specifics of, or any guilt or not lack of guilt of the city. But I just wanted to enlighten you guys that a pedestrian, a walking cleaner, can pick up and do a lot better than our trucks and cars at reporting. If we really put some money and resources into pedestrian workers, we can also get some homeless people and kill 2 birds with with 1 stone. So that's my proposal. I'm proposing it to different committees, and this was my today's proposal. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, with that, colleagues, that concludes all the public comment and general public comments. We'll go ahead and close those and turn our attention to the agenda. Item 6, I'd like to move on consent. Okay, so without objection, then that'll be the order. We're going to hold the closed sessions for a moment. Those are items 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we'll go ahead and jump over to item 5. So if we have any staff here on item 5.
Item 5 is an Office of Finance report relative to an analysis of the impact of extending the city's business tax renewal deadline from February 28th to April 15th to align with the California Franchise Tax Board and Federal Internal Revenue Service tax deadlines.
Okay. Do we have any staff here? Great.
Hi, I'm Melissa Krantz. I'm from the Office of the CAO. I did not author the report, but I did contribute to it.
Great.
Finance authored it.
Okay, so in this, I just wanted to highlight a couple. First of all, this was my motion, so I'm familiar with it. But the whole idea and the concept is to align when business taxes are due, to align when the state and federal tax deadlines come due in April as well instead of January. And not only having owned a business here in Los Angeles, but in representing and speaking to a lot of businesses for many, many years, this has been extremely difficult for businesses for a number of reasons. One, they in essence almost have to have a set of 2 separate books for tax purposes for the city on their gross receipts tax because of the different deadlines. It also comes due right after the holidays in January. So many file extensions because it's the last thing they have to deal with, and particularly in retail where their heaviest time is in that period of time for the holidays. So they come right back and they're too busy doing so many other things. It's the last thing they have time to deal with. I think it's roughly 65 or 67% of the businesses in Los Angeles are under the gross receipts $100,000 threshold that don't have to file anyway. So they don't have any issue, certainly, with it. And then the other part of that is it's also a financial burden on these businesses, from my understanding, because they have to hire their CPAs to do a full set of tax returns for the city at a completely separate time than they're doing their returns for the state and the federal. And so lining these up would make a lot of sense. It alludes in the report to a one-time offset of I think it was projected about $22 million, but I wanted to address that and ask you the question on that. First, it's not a decrease in revenue. It's only offset in time, for one.
It would be a one-time shortfall that would need to be addressed the year it's implemented.
Right.
That would essentially not, I mean, I think I'd heard a discussion in the committee previously about how that would be paid back with that subsequent year receipts, but if you think about it, then there's a shortfall that following year. So you would never really essentially recover that $22 million within a same fiscal year, so that
Right.
$22 million would always be behind. So the first year of implementation would be that one-time cut that you would need to address.
And so, but that $22 million is projected on those businesses who file extensions for the most part, correct?
So the calculation of the $22 million assumes that no real change in taxpayer behavior. So essentially, it just looked at shifting the receipts back 45 days. So that essentially, that would be the last receipts received in June and part of May, then being assumed to be received later on. So there's it's a small amount, but it would definitely be received.
And our total amount of gross receipts is how much?
I believe last year ended at $528 million.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so with that, though, and speaking with several others that have weighed in on this, I've learned that it's their feeling a lot of the businesses who file extensions, which is the primary sort of pool that we're looking at and talking about, assuming no behavior changed, that's what we're looking at in this space, they would, because they're filing extensions to be more on par with their federal and state returns now. So in January, they're filing their extensions, and that becomes due sometime in April or May, correct?
Well, the idea is that filers who file their taxes at the due date
Right.
are going to be filers who file their tax at the due date. I think a lot of us file our federal income tax on April 15th, when theoretically we could turn them in now if we wanted
Sure.
to.
No, but what I'm talking about is the difference, a lot of us, but we're talking about specifically only businesses.
Right.
And the businesses that file extensions just with the city and not with the state and federal, many of them are filing so they know they can bring because their books, they're in essence running one set of books, and they can do it all at the same time.
So there is no drill down for how
Right.
people's behavior would change. Likewise, there is also no drill down about, we'll be getting less penalties as well. So
Right.
that kind of analysis has not been done for that. This is just a quick and dirty estimate.
Okay. And then also the analysis on trying to establish and figure out how many more businesses would be in compliance if everything was due on around the same time.
Right. I mean,
It's
so
almost impossible to calculate.
Right. So the idea of compliance wouldn't really change the money received, except for the fact that you would have less penalties.
Right.
But essentially, everyone's still required to file right
Sure.
now or later. So that really shouldn't change the number of filers.
Right.
Just more when we would actually receive their
Sure.
return.
I've also asked some businesses based on the comments that some of my colleagues had made in the last conversation that suggested some businesses may feel they like it spread out more for cash flow. I've talked to several businesses who said just the opposite, actually. That in concept that sounds great, but actually this would make it due later in the year, better for cash flow, not right in January. And having everything due together actually saves them money from, and again, with their own bookkeeping. And I know most other cities that collect have it around the same time as the state and federal as well.
So, this report doesn't really address the impact of businesses. Finance did say they would be able to accommodate it.
Right.
What is also in this report is the impact on, our office's ability to forecast, and that's where
Sure.
I think we would see the greatest impact is
Right.
having an accurate number for budgeting purposes.
Sure.
So the focus of this report is the operational and the
Right.
financial impact. Probably to address what you're concerned about would be more of a survey or something like that, which is not in
Right,
this
right.
report.
Well, and again, in talking to a lot of the chambers and different businesses, they suggested this is one of the, outside of either eliminating or reducing gross receipts outright, aligning it with current deadlines that they're already aware of and working towards with state and federal rules and regulations, is one of the more business-friendly things and one of the most business-friendly things we can do to bring our compliance issues and reporting issues in line with meeting the objective of these businesses. So, colleagues, if you've got any further questions on this, I think one last thing on this, and I'd urge you to support it. This is a conversation that we've had for many years. I remember doing research on this back in the day with Councilman Greg Smith. And I think it's important to note that the sooner we do it, if we're going to do it at all, the better, so we can start reaching out to businesses and letting them know and having that outreach component of it, which I know is important to Councilmember Krikorian when he mentioned the outreach efforts and communication as well. So I want to open it up to see if you have any additional questions. Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, I think this is probably the easiest and most cost-effective pro-business thing we can possibly do. My only question is, if we do it and we don't have the information that we're used to having for the budget process, how do we actually functionally approach this in terms of calculating what the tax amount will be for the budget?
So I think the biggest problem is because we don't get monthly receipts, it's very difficult to identify kind of any trends in business tax receipts. So our current strategy is to look at receipts as they come in. And, hopefully by April 1st, we have an idea, since we have like about 85% of those receipts, or maybe closer to 90, we have an idea of where we'll end that year, and then that serves as the basis for our following year. If we shift it backwards, we won't have any of that data, so essentially it would be taking what we knew came in and assume a conservative growth. So it would be probably a more conservative estimate. If you looked at the table, we kind of showed how our revenue estimates grow as we get more information. That is something that we will lose if the year is doing well. We won't be able to recognize that until after we've budgeted a number. Likewise, if that revenue is doing poorly, we also won't be able to recognize that. So from the budgeting purposes, this might not actually be the best course of action. I don't know in terms, since finance isn't here, maybe they'd be better to talk about, for those businesses that do have hardships, whether it would be better to address it through allowing more flexibility about filing returns or lowering a penalty fee, but that's more for finance. Maybe just have those businesses that are having trouble meeting that current deadline, just have them have a means to file later, but maybe not apply it to the entire class of businesses filing business tax.
I assume even though we'd have an April 15th deadline, we'd have some filing information because some people will file early.
Yes, and we do have people filing their business taxes like in January, and they are doing that right now. And so that behavior will probably continue, which is why we didn't make any assumptions about early filers or late filers. There's no assumed change in behavior for either classification, people paying early or later.
Have we ever done any analysis to tell whether the earliest filing numbers are very different than the late filing numbers?
We have done that analysis. If you look at the chart, you can sort of see, if you have the report in front of you, you can sort of see how those numbers increase over time. So if you look at the top chart, you could see how little we get in business tax receipts until that due date hits. And then our receipts grow exponentially after there. So the amount of information that we have in January is too little to make any kind of even educated guess about what our receipts will be for the end of the year. Likewise, if you look at the second chart, you can see that even after that deadline, there's still a lot of noise in that receipt, and it's not well until like April that we have, just returns coming in, just trickling in, and these are just the late filers that are trickling in. The majority of the people have met that deadline earlier and have gotten those receipts in, and that's where we've based our projection on, is those people who are making that deadline.
And do we have any sense of what fewer percentage will file late once we match April 15th?
We have not made that assumptions about that.
I assume it'll be some fairly significant number because, as was noted, a lot of the people that file late do it so they can file in concert with their other tax filings.
So the 22 million is based on the late filers if the later deadline happens, and that's just based on gross receipts. We could certainly work with the Office of Finance and find out if they can also give us number of filers by month, and we could report back on that.
Because I suspect that number might be too high if it turns out that a lot of the late filers become current filers once it matches their other filings.
Right. So, what that assumption is that those late filers are no longer late filers, that they are meeting that deadline. The assumption is the really late filers, which are the people who are turning in returns around June or May, they're already late. We're not anticipating them getting any earlier. They're already after April 15th.
Right.
So. Oh, the Office of Finance is here as well?
Hi, Carl Sampson, Office of Finance. Sorry for being a little bit late, but I can add a little bit more
Sure.
to what's going on in terms of the revenue collection. From our perspective, it's not until about mid-March that we get a good sense as to we're on target or we're exceeding or we're behind on our revenue collections. Basically, I would want to say approximately 2/3 of our revenue come from 1% of our taxpayers. And so they wait to the very last, end of filing before they file. And so it's not until we get that final burst from the last week and into the first week or so of March that we know how much money's on hand that we'll be able to be reporting as far as business tax receipts. And so it's really at that point that we know. And so if we were to push the deadline to the 15th, well, it takes us 2 or 3 weeks to process that last surge that would be coming in from April 15th. And so we wouldn't know until towards May, the first part of May, as the equivalent period of time to know what the receipts would be. We have in the past tried to do projections ahead of time, as you mentioned. So, people will start filing in late December, January, February. So we did some studies where we took a sample we took everyone that had responded at that time and compared to what did they report last year, and get a percentage increase or decrease and try to project that. But what we found is that this small percentage of tax filers that wait till the very end have a much more weight in terms of one way or the other where we're going to be for collections at the given point of the year. So we're unsuccessful in doing that. And then I think the other portion where we talk about the monies that will be deferred, the $22 million that is deferred into the next fiscal year, what we do is we have a secondary renewal that we call notice of hearing, and so we will mail out to those businesses that did not respond to renewals. And so based on all the processing that we do in March and getting it into the system, we know then who didn't respond. We send out that subsequent mailing, which traditionally goes out the last week of April. And, the time to respond is the last week of April and the first week of May. And then that's when we'll get an additional $20 million from those late filers. Now, if we were going to get to that same point, we would be able to determine them, I want to say, in sometime in May. And then it takes a month to get that all arranged, mail out, so then it's June. And then, so that's going to push that money that we normally collect in those last couple of months into the next fiscal year. We'll still get the money, but that initial year, we would see those monies pushed into the.
And if I could, so what we're really talking about is there's no change in, the money received.
It'd be the timing.
It would be timing, and we're talking about months that would be updated in an FSR anyway.
Yeah, so I think that, it's the money that would be pushed into the next year.
Sure.
And then
So we can program it, we know.
Uncertainty
Yeah.
collections.
Right, which is always the case.
So.
That doesn't change, right?
Well,
In terms of the uncertainty, doesn't change.
Well, we will report where we're at as part of the budget process, and
right.
so those that are in that decision-making
Right.
capacity will know.
Yeah. And in terms of cash flow for the city, in terms of budget, we won't even feel the difference because we don't spend all our money up front in the beginning of the fiscal year. It's throughout the year. So it's not really going to make.
You're referring to cash flow, that is correct. So
Right, it's not-
cash flow, the impact is would be smaller. The biggest impact was we'd lose flexibility in structuring the TRAN.
Right.
You'd have to use later maturity dates, and right now the interest rates are fairly low, so wouldn't it be
Right.
costly if those rates did rise? That would be
Right.
a little bit bigger hit. And then the other impact then is, of course, since you have delayed receipt of business tax, you'd have to make sure that the other deadlines for other cash flows, like the DWP power transfer, which is a significant amount,
Right.
is done
right,
quickly.
Right, sure, which we do anyway. So any other questions on this? Yeah.
In terms of the projection issue, you're saying we would have the answers that we normally have by mid-May?
Yeah, I think basically we're looking at if we're delaying the deadline a month and a half, our answers would arrive a month and a half later.
Which is still prior to the deadline it's not good for the mayor's projections and for his preparing the budget, but for the council's final adoption of the budget, if we were to have a big increase or a big decrease, we'd still be able to adjust. Is that right?
I would like to clarify that. If you look at the chart that we have on page 3, for finance's estimating purpose, they, if I'm going to build on what Carl said, they're able to tell whether our receipts are performing above or below or at, but it really doesn't mean that we actually have come up with a sound final number. The chart itself shows that even in May, that the estimate that council put in the budget still had some growth. So that we would have that same issue. So, our budget number that we presented with the mayor's proposed budget was lower than what ended up being adopted by council. And if you look at how this number has changed over time, you could see what the controller and finance came up with in February and March, which would now be May, is much lower than what ended up being included in the mayor's proposed budget, and then which was much lower than what council then included in the budget, which then ended up even being lower than what the number ended at. So, there's a lot of new information that happens from the point that finance does their estimating for the March 1 letter to the time that we get it for the mayor's proposed budget and the time that you get it from the CFO.
We definitely would lose out on that back end, but what I was commenting on is sort of the first tranche of when he says the main revision comes in of when we make our basic budget prediction would still be within the window of the city budget process. It's just the refinements that happen after that, which do have a real impact, would not be.
Correct. So from the point of that window, the estimate from finance and the controller was at the budget number. That was included in the prior year budget, the $503 million, and that was the estimate that came in for the March 1 letter. It was after that we increased it from $504 million to $513 million, and that was what was included in the mayor's proposed budget, and then it was $517 by the time council adopted it. And that increase is not just for the current year, that's also the assumed growth that you have for the next year, so you're adjusting two numbers at that time, and so you'll lose that ability to not just look at this year's and have that number serve as, this is where we think we'll actually end this fiscal year. That is a better number that serves as the base for the next year's growth. Moving that forward means you're using last year's number only. You have no new information.
Well, you have some new information. You just don't have all that. You have the big
limited.
What Carl just said is that the projection comes in May. If we were to move to the other one, we
right.
wouldn't. I understand what you're saying. It's just it's not as dire as we wouldn't have anything. We would have the first projection. We just wouldn't have the next two refinements, which are significant.
Correct.
And I hear what you're saying, but it's not completely flying blind. It's actually flying with just the first tranche of adjustments.
Correct.
Or at least the council flying. It's making the mayor's budget predictions be flying less blind, more blind, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But then we would have a bite at the apple with a little bit more information. We wouldn't have the subsequent information.
Yes.
And we also have the historical information.
The historical information. We also, as you mentioned, have the ability to make changes, and
right.
It would force us probably to be more conservative in our numbers.
Right.
Like if it happened this last year, it means we would have had less money to close the gap with,
right.
and probably would have had to make more cuts. But there could be future years where the opposite could happen. Either way, you want more information is always better, and I get that.
I think our biggest handicap with the business tax is because it comes in at one big chunk. So there's really no hint about whether you're going to hit budget, be above it or below it until it starts coming in. Whereas with sales tax or TOT or property tax, where there's at least some kind of stream that you can go, we have an idea of where it's going to hit. We won't have that information. So you'll have the historical information, but if something's changing in the middle of the year, we won't have any clue until after it's come forward from the mayor's budget.
Is there a reason why we don't have, like, there's no sort of estimating or something that can happen to give us more of a clue, or asking businesses for, you know, advanced
Our office
information?
doesn't have any access to any tools like that.
Yeah, no. Yeah, other than looking at, economic trends and those things and kind of applying them to, what your expectations were. We don't have any reporting that's coming to us as to what the actual receipts are until they are due and they're turned in as part of the tax.
Separate conversation, we could talk about creative ways to try to do that, maybe offering incentives for people to file early or to give us information, but that's not so much on this question. Another question, though, what do other benchmark cities do in terms of their gross receipts tax? When do most other cities in California?
Well, I guess it would depend also on, there are a lot of cities that don't have a gross receipts tax. I think majority of them have some sort of a flat fee that's generally due, at the end of the year. I would say that, those that do have some sort of receipts, more of those tend to be, along with the April 15th.
Is there any sort of, I'd love to see, I mean, that's very knowable information, like a list of all the major benchmark cities that have gross receipts and what they do, to see if we're out of line with all that.
Certainly.
And that information might exist. We'd have to look into it.
Okay, I'd love to get that information as part of whatever report back we get. Also, I know we discussed something similar with the con plan, the CDBG funding. We discussed the desirability of syncing that with the fiscal year. That would also have a one-time hit to the general fund. Could you discuss the relative importance of the two and how those?
I'm sorry, I'm not very aware of the con plan issue. If you want.
CDBG.
Right, no, I think it's the same issue with the comp plan. As you said, the program year, I think, is April through March 31st. And in order to sync that up with the fiscal year, we would lose basically a quarter of the receipts in 1 year. We'd have to make up that difference. The full amount of the comp plan, I don't have it off the top of my head. I think it's a lower amount obviously than the business tax. But the percentage is, quarter percentage as compared to 22 million for the business tax. It could be a comparable impact, I would think. And again, the issue of making those changes throughout the course of the fiscal year, because these are changes, it is just a timing of receipts, but because on the back end, the timing of receipts will always be the same, we will not have the opportunity, as Ms. Grant said, to sort of make up that difference at any point. And there really is FSRs wouldn't give us that opportunity because the next revenues would continue to be delayed by that same amount.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I also wanted to point out, I think there's another benefit that I recall on this as well, which was the police and fire permit renewals are currently due by December 31st. So I understand finance is suggesting that this would actually help with moving the deadline for them as well.
Moving that deadline or keeping the?
No, that moving this deadline would help, because it would give them more time to complete the police and fire permits for tobacco and those
but again, it's probably smaller in the greater picture, but there would be some benefit there.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. There was a request to look into if and what other cities have a business tax, gross receipts tax, and when those are due. And in terms of the outreach plan for how would we reach the businesses and let them know of the new deadline, I know we didn't discuss that. The chair wanted those to come back as well. So why don't we go ahead and hold this in committee for those two items to come back next Monday, and we'll reschedule it for next Monday agenda as well. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Very well. Item 7.
Item number 7 is a motion to Englander Rodriguez relative to the purchase of 3 0MMX electric off-road motorcycles for use of the Los Angeles Police Department's off-road unit.
All right, thank you. So it was brought to my attention recently. First of all, I've been out, I've seen the bikes in the past, what we've had, and I know they're incredibly useful. These are all electric, zero-emission off-road motorcycles that we use for patrolling the hillsides as well as sensitive locations and particularly equestrian communities, correct? Okay, and tell me why these are such a benefit versus gas-powered, beyond emission issues.
Yes, sir. The electric bikes are quiet, number one, so when we go into these equestrian communities, it doesn't affect those, the horses and so forth. The other thing is the fact that it costs the city 6 cents to basically charge. There's no threat of fire. We're stealth when we go into these locations. And the bikes are handled just like a regular gas bike. So the benefits on them, and also the maintenance costs, it costs very little for maintenance, tires, brakes, and chain. So there's some cost savings for the actual repairs on bikes.
Okay. Now, obviously, we read recently and saw the stories on the electric vehicles and LAPD, the BMWs that weren't being utilized to move forward with acquisition of, we're talking about 3, doubling our fleet from 3 to 6, I think, on these. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We're being requested more and more with the homeless encampments that are appearing throughout the rural areas of the city. And we're going out there and working with the council office, with the park rangers, with Lost Hope units, and these bikes are beneficial to be able to go in there and provide those duties.
Okay, thank you. And I also understand that if we act now, we get 50% off the price tag.
There's some rebates that we've looked into that are from, I believe, the state.
Right, and they expire when?
March 1st is the deadline for submitting the application to the Southern California Air Quality Management Board.
So they have a significant rebate if we act pretty much now.
They will essentially pay half the cost, up to half.
Up to half, right.
We will need to come back to council. They prefer that we use mobile source air pollution reduction funding for this. We don't have to, but that's their preference. And we've looked at it, and there is enough funding for that. So we're going to need to come back to council to get approval for that allocation. And the grant requires a presentation be done to council, and that council essentially bless.
Well, let me ask you this. Can we just move it with the recommended funding source from that source to council with that recommendation? What we're talking about is all in for those 3, the cost of the city portion is what, $45,000 or so?
Approximately.
Okay, so
I need to do frankly, a little bit more research and do the numbers carefully.
Right.
And the requirements of the funding.
Okay.
So if we can come back or work with your office.
Well, what we could do is move this out of committee, schedule it for council, and you can make that presentation to council, correct? Okay, with the recommendation of that particular funding stream.
Right.
Okay. Yes.
This sounds like a great idea. My only question is why only 3, especially since we have the opportunity to buy them cheaply. Is there a disadvantage to them when you're not using them for the specific sort of stealth purposes that we've talked about? Or should we be looking at trying to buy more while we have the opportunity?
So one of the concerns is if we went to a fully electric fleet of off-road units, in the event that we needed to travel further or the mission required more than 50 miles, which is the approximate limit, you might have an issue. So if we had simultaneous emergencies going on, like with the floods or the fires, and we had to deploy our off-road unit, and then another emergency came up, we would have to wait until those units recycled and recharged. So we need to have both the gas as well as the electric fleet. Now, if your question is, do we need a larger fleet of electric off-road? For this particular unit, because it is an ancillary duty that these are officers that are assigned to regular traffic enforcement details that do these special details as requested and based on grants. Now, their requests have increased, as Officer Carbajal mentioned. So I don't know if it would be feasible budget-wise or maintenance to support these if we increased and just had them in waiting. But that's something that I think motor transport could probably study and analyze further.
I mean, obviously, we wouldn't want to replicate the experience that Mr. Englander just mentioned of just having them waiting around, but would we actually have an opportunity to use more of them just in everyday activities? Obviously, you wouldn't want your whole fleet to have that because you'd wind up with some stuck motorcycles, but right. I would imagine more than 6 could be utilized, throughout the city.
So these are strictly for off-road use. These are not the traffic enforcement motorcycles that the department has tested for street use for enforcement. These are very specific in terms of their mission. And to try to utilize these for dual purpose in terms of on the street and off highway, this would not be the right venue or the right tool for that. If the city, is looking into augmenting the street motorcycles, that is currently still being studied.
So how many off-road motorcycles do we have in use now?
So we have 5 gas-powered and 3 electric. And 2 of the gas-powers have had some issues in terms of mechanical issues. So that really leaves us with a fleet of 3 and 3. We try not to mix and match the gas and the electric because it defeats the purpose of why we want the electric out there in the operational field. The stealth mode, the fact that they're environmentally friendly, they seem to provide a great resource for what these officers have to do on a daily basis when they are deployed.
Thank you.
The 50% discount, is that available to the general public, or is that something unique for LAPD?
It's unique to cities and counties that have opted in to the funding source.
Funding source?
For mobile air source pollution funding.
Got it. So it's not a special thing that we have. It's this more general purpose. That's good. And then I saw something that mentions MICLA financing. Are we talking about MICLA financing?
No, MICLA. We cannot use MICLA for motorcycles, first of all, and that is not the source of funding they're looking for us to use.
Great. That concerned me because of I hate seeing it spent on depreciating items and that kind of thing. So that's good. Okay.
Okay. All right. So, colleagues, we'll go ahead and approve this item, move it to council with and update the report to show that the funding source should be from the Mobile Air Source Protection Fund. Reduction Fund.
And I forgot to mention that part of the requirement is that we do a PowerPoint presentation to council.
Okay, so if you can put that together for when we agendize, we're going to have to move this to council pretty quickly.
Right.
So we can, so we don't miss that deadline.
Week? Is that too long?
Well, you need enough time to submit, and the deadline is March. So I think, I think a week should be fine.
Okay.
Is that funding source is an LAPD controlled funds or
no?
Whose funds are those?
The CAO manages this fund, and there are funds available for this.
And if you could on that too, if we can make sure when we agendize it that it's going to have a PowerPoint presentation and put that on the agenda. While it had satisfied public comment, we want to make sure it doesn't just go on consent at council because it needs the presentation. Okay.
Okay.
We'll make sure of that too. Great. Excellent. All right. We're good? All right, so that's approved as amended. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. On a side note, I've been trying to get those additional 3 motorcycles for them for about 4 years, so this will be good. All right, so now the last remaining items, we'll go ahead and go into closed session on items 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to stay in here, and if there's anybody here we'll go ahead and take item 1. Open session, and that concludes the agenda items. We have a correction on the agenda as well.
Yes, Mr. Chair. On item number 3, the description for this matter, which is Jose Avendano versus City of Los Angeles et al. The description should read, "This matter arises from an alleged dangerous condition of roadway incident involving a bicyclist.
Okay. Thank you for the correction. And seeing no other business before this committee, that concludes the agenda, and we are adjourned. Thank you.